You've probably been hearing a lot in the last few days about General Motors and Chrysler and their potential merger. And this is a pretty complicated deal and there's a lot behind it. And we don't know everything that's behind it. But a lot of people think it's all about GM merging with Chrysler in order to grab Chrysler's bag of cash. Chrysler's thought to have $10–11 billion on hand, which GM desperately needs. In fact, though, that isn't what's behind this deal. Chrysler's cash is pretty much spoken for. It might have as much as $10 billion, but Chrysler also needs $3 or $4 billion to run the business on a day-to-day basis. And the rest of the money is spoken for obligations to pension funds and other places, so GM wouldn't be able to touch it. What GM is looking for here is to position itself for long-term survival. Right now, GM has about 22% of the market. Chrysler's got around 11%. You put the two companies together and they suddenly have 1/3 of the American market. They're the overwhelming leader and they would be in very good shape there. What GM would do is probably lop off just about all of Chrysler's white-collar employees and also close a lot of Chrysler factories. The front-drive Chrysler products, things like the Dodge Caliber and the Sebring, would get transferred over to GM front-drive platforms. And there'd be a lot of consolidation in the engines and in the overall technology. And in the end, there'd be a lot of savings for the combined company. Now, none of this would be easy. If GM and Chrysler get put together, you end up with 11 different brands. That's probably twice as many as you need for 1/3 of the market. And closing half of those brands is going to cost some sales and cost some money. But in the long term, it would leave GM a much stronger company, even at the price of killing Chrysler, which may not be able to survive on its own in any case. But it still leaves the problem of what's GM going to do over the next couple of years. These days, GM is thought to have about $20 billion of cash on hand. GM needs $10 billion just to stay in business and working capital, to pay the bills, to make payroll, to order parts. And so it's got $10 billion to burn through before it essentially starts running into the wall. Now, GM right now is losing between $1 and $2 billion every month. And so if it's got $10 billion to burn through, that means in 6 months, GM could really be in serious trouble. And that's why there's all this talk about getting a government injection of cash into GM and the other car companies. The government just invested something like $700 billion in the financial system, and those are people who just push money around. General Motors actually builds things, it employs hundreds of thousands of people, and if it needs $10 billion in order to stay around for a longer term future, it's money well spent. It's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I think both of the politicians are a little bit interested in keeping GM alive, and certainly the state of Michigan is pushing hard because over here we've been in a recession for several years. But this has to be one of the toughest times ever for the domestic auto industry, and whether the government comes up with cash for GM in the next couple of months is really going to be the difference, and it's going to determine whether GM survives.